Okay, in your packet, we'll start again. You'll have a sheet that looks like this, which is your layout and your grid. Then you're going to have easy piecing instructions. Then you're going to have your instructions, that's patriotic pineapple, materials and so forth. And then you're going to have a sheet that has several pages on how to make your binding. Okay? And what you need to do is sorry about that. Okay, and you're also going to have a glue stick. It will come in handy. You'll have a pre-printed piece of Pellin that has adhesive on one side, and this is our grid that we're going to be placing our squares on. It'll be just like putting a puzzle together. Then you'll have a backing backing fabric, and the fabric is an assortment. I don't know, I just had whatever I had that was patriotic or could be patriotic. That's what I put in the kits. Then I gave you a piece of batting, and I like this kind of cotton batting. It's nice, it's easy to sew. It's a bigger piece than what you actually need, because when you quilt it, however you quilt it, it's going to take it in and shrink it a little bit. So, and even when we start piecing and start sewing what we've pieced, it'll shrink a little bit. So I wanted to make sure you had plenty of batting. We're going to cut it down eventually, okay? So don't worry about that. Okay, in your kit you also have some red squares. They're all 2.5 inches. Some blue squares, some off-white or ivory, a couple plain gray squares. You're going to have some half-square triangles, blue and gray, and red and gray, okay? And you're going to have border strips for a round pineapple quilt, and then you're going to have some blue binding strips that we're going to talk about later, okay? So those are the things that came in your kit. You will need to trim this down a little bit. I brought my paper scissors with me. You want to have 4 squares across and 7 squares down. Now I left a little space around it, but when you're going to press this, if you're not careful, you could get some of this on your iron, or you could warp it a little bit. So what I'm going to tell you is go ahead and cut on that outer edge. Do not cut your line off, but just cut on that outer edge, okay? All the way around. Okay. So go ahead and do that, and see what I'm doing. I'm just cutting around. I'm cutting off my excess. Okay? I still have my little line there, but I'm just cutting off the excess so that when I get ready to iron this, I won't melt it or anything like that. So go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back with you in a minute. Okay, now we should all have our piece cut out. And like I said, I just cut off the outer edges. I still have my grid line and I can see. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow our layout guide, and we're going to start placing our squares. That's where the glue comes in handy. You want to lay your Pellin so the bumpy side is up, facing you, okay? You want it up. And you're going to take your glue, and you're going to put a little bit on each square, and following, I'm just putting about 3 little dabs, following your grid there, you're going to start placing your squares. You want them right in the center of your block, okay? Right in the center of that grid mark. Okay, I just placed that one right there. See if I can, there you go. That's my first square, all right? Now you're going to see the glue because it's that purple disappearing stuff, but it won't matter, okay? Now the next one on my grid, is my half square triangle. Now, when you're putting, there's a trick to this, okay? When you're putting this on the grid, I don't know if I can get it up close enough to you, but there's little X's that are really imprinted darkly there. Where's my, let's see if I can get to it. Okay, right there. See that X? There's one marking down by the corner here, edge too, that's a little darker. You want to angle your triangle so that it lines up pretty close to those X's. Okay? You want to make sure that your angle is lined up. Okay? It's pretty hard for me to get this up close so you can see it. But if you look at my diagonal line on my piece, it's going as close to the middle of that, where that intersects. My line is going right in the middle of that. Okay? Okay, so now all you have to do is continue following your design and put some glue down on the bumpy side, put your piece on there and press it, center it in the square, okay? And there's going to be gaps between the pieces. That's okay. Just center it into the square, and when we come back, I'll explain how we go about sewing this, okay? So I'm going to break while you go ahead and do your gluing. Okay, I have mine all glued on, and you see that it's a little wimpy right now. Now, the first block I put on was the wrong color, so I took it off. The nice thing about the glue stick, you can take it off and so forth. Now comes the part where we're going to press this, and you may need an adult to help you with this part, only because an iron is hot and it will burn. Now you want to have it as high as you can, and preferably with some steam. And I'm going to do some rearranging here and get this over here. I have an ironing board with me. Okay. Mine's heating up nicely here. Okay, you are just going to press. You are not going to iron. Ironing is going this way and everything like that. You're going to press down, then up, and press down again. Okay, what we are trying to do is we're going to adhere these on here. All right, and if you've trimmed your pattern close, you shouldn't have too much exposed. And when you press your iron on, it should not stick to it, okay? If you find that you're having some problems, maybe get a piece of parchment paper if you have any, or just a plain piece of white paper to between it and the thing, okay? So I'm going to just push it down, count to 10. Lift it, move to another section. Again. Okay, and I just move it, keep moving it down. You should be using steam. I don't have steam in this this iron right at the moment, but it's still doing the job. The fabric makes a nice barrier between you and the other. If you see that something hasn't adhered, you can hold it on longer but really only about 10 seconds is all that you really need to anchor that on. Okay. Once that's done, it is time to think about how we're going to sew this. I have green thread on the machine so that when I show you the stitching, you'll understand. Okay. With everything pressed, what we're going to do is it's going to automatically fold for you anyhow, but we're going to fold it just like that. See how I did that? This is the top, this is the front, and then this folds right over, and you should line up with the dotted line. Okay, there should be a dotted line there. Okay, now you definitely just want to use a 1/4 of an inch seam on here. Okay, so I'm going to line my fabric, and I'm going to make sure that I'm at a 1/4 of an inch, and let's see, is that a 1/4? That looks like a 1/4. Okay, alrighty. And you're just going to take it, now I have my edge of the fabric, this edge, right at the edge of my presser foot, okay? So that's going to help guide me down to make my seam. So just get your needle down, hold on your back threads, and it should be just a straight stitch. And just follow it down. Okay, and then press our foot up, pull our threads out and clip them off, pull our thread back to the back. Okay, you should have sewed one edge down, okay? So that's my first seam, okay? And I got to cut some threads here that are hanging out. They're always a nuisance. Okay. So you did one row of 4, and that, instead of having to piece every single row, or every single piece, I should say, we're going to continue down the rest of the way. So all you have to do is fold it along that line, okay, there's that dotted line, and do your sewing, and when you're done, we'll come back and we'll show you the next steps to making your pineapple. Okay. Okay, you should have something that looks like this when you've sewed it all together. Okay, see, it's shrinking, starting to shrink on us. And if I would have had to piece all that, it would have taken quite some time. This is a quick, easy method, and your intersections where all the pieces meet should be close or perfect. Okay, now before we can move on to sew the other way, we have to clip. And so you take your scissors, and right where you've sewed, okay, you need to clip to the thread line, okay? So just take your scissors, cut down to the thing, see where I'm at? Now if you accidentally cut further, don't worry about it. It'll be caught in the next round of things, okay? This is just helping us to separate when we get ready to press here again. So go ahead, and I'll do this again. I'll just clip down to my threads, and see, I'm right between there, okay? Just I'm following the lines, and I'm just going to my sewing line, okay? I'll do that one more time. I'm clipping right where the dotted lines are and down through, there you go, okay? I follow the dotted lines, I cut down to my seam line, okay? So now you need to go and do that to the entire quilt, and then we'll come back here and go to the next step, okay? We're going to press our seams going different ways. If you notice, when you cut it's going to easily fold sideways now, the lengthwise, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure the seams all go one way on the top row, then this next row it goes the opposite direction, and so forth. And the reason we want that is so that we can interlock our seams when we go to sew. So go ahead and press your one row. Okay. And it makes it easy if you just fold this over, okay? And now we want to press this direction. We want to press those seams, go in the opposite direction, okay? There we go. And I just fold it again. And since that one's on that way, I need to make sure that these other ones are going the opposite direction. Alrighty. And then the last one needs to go opposite of what we just did. Okay. Alrighty. Okay. And I'll give it a press from the front. Okay, so it's all pressed. My rows of seams are going opposite directions, as you can tell here. And now I'm ready to sew the next step. So I'm going to set everything up, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, we are ready to finish sewing this. So if I fold this over the first row, my seam should nest. Okay, I'm going to get right up close here. See how my seams are nesting? There's the one edge of the one, and this is the edge. That's nesting, okay? That's what you want, and that's why we pressed them. So now we're going to do the same thing we did at the first. We're going to start folding these over and sewing them. And as soon as I'm going to do the first one here while we're together, and then I'm going to go off and let you do it. You'd be surprised, this grid actually comes in smaller sizes. Just make sure your seams nest, okay? As you approach a seam, make sure it's nesting, that they're going opposite directions. So I'm watching as I go down through here. So I sewed down that side. I made sure that my seams were nested. And when I open it up, my whole row has been sewed completely. Okay? And my intersections are almost perfect. almost. Okay, you're trying for perfect, but almost is good enough. This is your first attempt at doing something like this, and if you're keeping up with me, you're doing a good job. Okay, so I'm going to let you finish the next two seams, and then we'll meet back here to talk about the rest of the project. Okay, how'd you do? Did you get something that looks like this? Okay, wasn't that easy patchwork? Now, if you should happen to see that there are some little gaps when you tug just a little gently, where your seams might not have went, you might need to take a little bit deeper seam, okay? Because if you put your pieces on, centered in the square, and you sew it, you should have everything lined up, okay? Alrighty, now you just need to give it another press so it's flattened down, okay? Gonna flatten, make sure it's nice and flat here. Pat yourself on the back. You've got the hardest part done. Okay. You've sewed your pieces together. Now we need to add the border strips. So your piece should be trimmed if you've stayed aligned with your squares. You shouldn't have to trim anything off. It should all be about equal. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to take your two gray strips, and right now, if you just cut the one in half, where'd my good scissors go? You'll have two pieces here that you can place on the sides. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to put right sides or pretty sides together, and you're going to line up the pieces right with that pellin, because that is your edge that you know is straight. Okay, and you don't want to use the end that has the selvage on it, okay, because we're going to trim this off. Just line your piece up and then do some pinning or clipping. Okay, and you can do that to one side, and you can do it to another side, the other side. When you're piecing your side strips on your mini quilt, you start from the one edge and you come down, and then start from the other, the bottom edge, and go up, or the opposite edge. Now make sure you are not using the selvage edge, and pin your piece on so you're matching. Pin the other side. Get your needle and thread ready. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down my sides. It's going to be a little hard for you to see my seams because I did switch to gray because that's the color I was going to quilt in when I do my quilting. So make sure your edges are even, square up that corner, and stitch 1/4 of an inch along your edge. We're doing the sides first, and then we'll do the top. Remove your pins and your clips prior to getting there. Okay. And let's see. I have to go back up here. Okay. There we go. Alrighty. Now we can go back. Stitch down this side. Okay, you can sew off a little bit onto the gray past where you need to end. Needle up, foot up, and cut our threads. Cut our threads at the beginning. Okay, so I just sewed all the way down, okay, and looks good to me. Okay, now I'm going to start, and I'm going the other way. The reason I also suggested that you swap the direction that you're going, sometimes when you sew your seams, especially if you're doing jelly roll races and so forth, you need to swap which way you sew so you don't get anything wonky. If you keep sewing the same way, sometimes you'll get a wonky seam. So that's why I'm having you start on opposite ends to sew. Again, I'm going to go right off where I was sewing, and I'm going to raise my needle, raise my presser foot, cut my threads. Okay. Now while it's still folded here, you can flip it over so you can see where your edges are. See, I have it the wrong side, and I'm going to trim my piece of gray right equal to the previous piece, okay? So you're going to have some excess pieces here of fabric. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to do it again. Have it folded in so I can see it. I got some loose threads here. And I'm just going to go and I'm going to trim it right even with my dotted line, okay? Okay. Now you're going to fold that out, and we can finger press this seam. Just finger press it. Okay. And we'll finger press the other side. If you want to use the iron, you're more than welcome to, but finger pressing will work. Okay, now that I have that done, I can get my other piece of gray and I can again cut it in half. We're going to waste a little bit of fabric, but I mean, it's not going to be an overabundance. Okay. Take your straight edge that you didn't cut. Oh, excuse me. It's one of those days, folks. Okay, line your pieces up. And again, line that edge up too. If you want to go a little bit past it, you can trim it off later. But I'm lining mine up, it works. And I'm going to pin. We're going to cross the top and the bottom now of our pineapple, okay? And we're just going to pin or clip across the top. And again, we'll probably be doing some trimming. Not a whole lot, but some. So I'm going to go ahead and pin my other side. Okay, now I'm ready to sew, and then I can trim off my excess, and then we'll be ready for our quilt sandwich. So, You're doing a 1/4 of an inch seam all the way down on both the across the top and the bottom now. Okay. Remove your pins as you go. You do not want to break a needle. I'm just going off the edge there. Okay, raise my needle, raise my presser foot, cut my threads. Okay, I got one edge end done. Now I'm going to go to the next. Okay. Now I'm staying with you with these sewing because I've been having some technical difficulties and I don't want to lose you. Now it's a little bit rough going over those seams, but your machine can do it. You can go slowly over the ball if you want. Or you may have to use your hand crank. Okay. Raise my needle, raise my foot, cut my threads. And again, turn it to the back side and go ahead and cut, follow your fabric and cut it straight across. Okay. And the other side. Make sure you're laying it out flat so that you're not cutting something that you don't want to cut. We don't want any accidents. So then you can just finger press that up. Now if you want, you can always take an iron and press that to make sure it's flat. Okay, I'm going to move some things out of the way just for a sec. Okay, now in order to make our, this is the finish, what you should have, okay? In order to make your quilt sandwich, which is what we need to do next, we're going to lay down, first of all, on our table, our backing fabric, whatever it might be. If you want to press it to get all the wrinkles out, you can if you want to. Then we're going to lay our batting down on it. Okay, so right now I have my pretty side facing down. Okay, so the wrong side is facing up. Then I have my batting, and the batting doesn't have a right side and a wrong side. But I'm going to try and center it on my fabric. Okay. Okay. And then I'm going to take my quilt that I just pieced, and I'm going to center that on here. Okay? And you should have plenty of space. Okay? Especially on the sides, maybe not so much at the top and the bottom, but you will have some extra space there. Not much, but you'll have it. Okay? You adjust it so that you can. Now, usually the fabric will kind of stick together for you, but when you are quilting, one thing I forgot to bring with me are actual safety pins. I don't see anything in my container here. But when you are quilting, putting your sandwich together, you can either run basting stitches, okay, all through here, and those are just big stitches with a needle and thread, and that will hold it, okay? Or you can use safety pins, and what the idea is, I got a loose thread there, is you take and you put your safety pin through all 3 layers, and then you put your hand or a fist and you put another pin from that, okay? So if I had safety pins here, I'd put one down here, then I have my fist, and then I put another one here to hold my sandwich together. And I would go through and do that all over my quilt, okay? And then I'd get ready to quilt it. Since I don't have any pins with me that are safety pins, I am going to use straight pins, and I'm going to have to be very, very careful. Again, I'm putting them in strategically. I'm going to watch that my hands away from them. I'm going a fist apart. I'll show you here in a minute. And I'm putting a pin in. And the thing is with the safety pins, I'm going to have to be very careful not to stab myself, and also be able to sew around them, okay? So in a minute here, I'll show you what I'm doing here. Okay. But if you use safety pins and you go through all 3 layers and then remove them as you go, which is what you have to do anyhow, whether you use straight pins, or whether if you hand baste it, which I could do that. If you hand baste it, you're just sewing through the several layers here and making big stitches. Okay, let me see. I'll just show you an example. Now, you don't even have to knot the ends. All you need is a single thread, and all I do is I go from one end and I just line it up. I'm basting it. I'll go across this way. And usually you work from the center out. Since I have pins in the center, I'm just going up here to the top. And hand basting with a needle and thread might be the better bet for you. It's all up to you, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. Now I'm using black thread so you can see what I'm doing. And basically the stitches are just to hold your fabric from shifting, because when you're sewing, you don't want to have it shifting on you and getting wonky. So you anchor it down. Now, some people will use spray adhesives and so forth to put their pieces together. This is so much, it's just so small of a piece. You could do it either way, but the thing is, you wouldn't have access to spray adhesive. But a lot of quilters will use, and there we go. Okay, I did some big stitches. You can see it better up here in the top, okay? And I did some stitches diagonally, and I also did some pinning. So it's what you feel comfortable with. You should actually use safety pins if you're going to pin. And again, a fist apart. I'll finish doing a quick pinning job here, since I'm not basting the whole thing. Okay, now with your quilting of this sandwich, you have a couple options for you. You can follow either down the rows, the lines. Your quilting stitches are going to show because you don't have any invisible thread. And I personally cannot use invisible thread. I have difficulties with it. It doesn't always run in my sewing machines. And so I'm just not an invisible person. Your quilting is going to show on the back. You could pick the color of your fabric in the back, or you just use white. I'm going to use gray. And I'm going to, there's different ways of doing it, okay? I'm going to try and get as close as I can here. Okay, you can follow the seams. When you sew, you can stitch in the ditch. You can come right close to this line here, or you can sew 1/4 of an inch around your squares. You can, your seam is right there, so then you follow with your presser foot that seam, and you can stitch 1/4 of an inch around, okay? Stitching down in the ditch, you're just following your grid basically, and you can do your triangles here, okay? You can also just take and mark all the way across 1/2 inch, or you can use your presser foot to as your measurement guide, or you can pick a pretty stitch. Now I'm going to use a serpentine stitch on this particular quilt, and I'm going to start from the I think I'm just going to come straight down, and but you could go at an angle if you wanted to. Wherever you start stitching, it's up to you. That's where it becomes your own. If you want to play with following a line, you could draw something on here with a chalk along your borders. If you want to draw something on your borders to follow a line, you can do that. There's nothing that says you can't. You can be creative. Draw some stars and follow it with your sewing machine needle. Okay? It's up to you. Okay? This is your learning piece. The pineapple is a sign of welcome in colonial times, and you'll see a lot of homes have pineapple motifs. You may want to make this pattern again and use orange or use lemon colored fabric or yellow fabric and green fabric to make a real pineapple looking quilt. So it's really up to you. But I'm going to take and I'm going to use a serpentine stitch, and I think I might just go from one corner to another, or just go diagonally across. But it's up to you. Diagonally, it's going to take a little while to get down here. But anyhow, I'm using this, I just like the serpentine. It just goes this way. But make sure your needle is in the home position or the middle position, your needle. so that you're not doing a 1/4 inch stitch, because you want to, when you're doing a fancy stitch, you want that fancy stitch to have the length of the opening in your foot. So you do, if you do use a pretty stitch or an embroidery stitch that's on your machine, fancy stitch, make sure you have the right foot on there. You want the open toe foot. You don't want any small tiny hole, because as soon as you move that needle over for something fancy, it's gonna hit and break your needle, and you might injure yourself. Use your wheel to test out the stitch first before you start using it, so that you can tell whether it's going to hit your presser foot or not. And that is a sure way to do it. So you just lower your presser foot, or you can lower your presser foot. Where's my lever? And then bring your needle down very slowly. And if it hits that presser foot, that's not a stitch you want to use, okay? Or your presser foot is not the right foot to use. Okay. So you just have to be a little bit diligent and watch what you're doing so that you don't get injured or anything. But you can test out your stitches on a scrap piece of paper. Just put a piece of paper in there and do your stitch, and you'll see where it's going to go, and see whether you like it. See whether you need to lengthen it or not. This machine is not the easiest thing for me to set. This is just a travel sewing machine. It's not my good one. My good one has whistles, so I can easily set things. So, but whatever machine you're using, you can do the stitches and so forth. So, I'm going to try and stitch this. I may have to go, I think I'm going to try and go from one corner to another corner on the blocks and do my serpentine. I will try and show you what it looks like. I have to set my machine up a little differently here now to get that serpentine. It's a little different than what I have at home on a different machine, and it won't go from point to point. I'm just going to follow my squares and see if I can do it. Okay, again, take out any pins as you get there. You're going to be holding the fabric with both hands. You're going to go slowly, especially if you're doing anything fancy. Even if you're doing straight down in the ditch, you just want to go slow. Kind of keep in mind where you're heading, okay? I'm not looking clear back here to keep my line straight. I'm looking at where I'm going, okay? I'm heading out here to this other point. So that's where I'm keeping my eyes on as I'm going. Okay, and I have to adjust. Okay, and I'm going to hold my fabric. Okay, and I'm going to do some more adjusting here. Okay. I'm being careful I don't get pinned. Going to lose things. I'll move my sewing machine up a little further close to me. Okay, I got to remove that pin. Okay, and I'm going to run right off into my batting. Okay, and then I'm going to come up. Okay. Okay, so I went down on here. You can see it probably better on my back end here. See my serpentine? Okay? And I'm just going to then move over a little ways. Now see, I can judge. I'm going to go and follow my seams. Let me hold this up better. Okay. What I did is I started out on the edge, and I followed my corners. See, I kind of followed right down. Okay, so now I'm going to start over here and follow this area down. And that's how I'm going to continue quilting this. So go ahead and decide how you want to quilt it, and go ahead and we'll be right back. I also want to let you know that if you start from one end and you get work from your center out, then turn it around and work the other way out, okay? Usually you work from the center out, and I should have said that before, but I was starting up in the corner, but that corner also brought me into the center of my quilt. So I'm going to start now again, and I'm going to stick my quilt in so that I'm into the center, but I'm on the bottom side, opposite end of what I've already started. And I'm going to continue with my quilting. And also, if you want to do crosshatch, you can go one direction down and then go the other way across, and make like a grid type motif on your quilt. Everything is possible. It's just how much patience you have to do it. You can even put a star and do a stitch of a star in some of your blocks or not. It's all up to you. So again, I'm going to continue sewing this, and then we'll get back together again. You can also roll your fabric a little bit underneath your throat. Some of you might have short throats, and you just roll it, and then that kind of gives you a little bit better hold onto your fabric. I know sometimes if I need to have that anchorage, that's what you do. So, and you just go over your basting stitches. If you sewed any basting stitches, you're going right over it. You can pull those out after you're done sewing. They're not hard to pull out. But as you're sewing, if you need to roll this, feel free to do that. It helps a whole lot, and it gives you that better anchorage. And then once you're past where you need, make sure you have your hands there away from the needle, but where you can keep your fabric taut and smooth. Okay? Okay, I have mine all quilted. It's going diagonally down. So you see the diagonal going down. Okay, before you remove your strings or your stitching, basting stitches, if you did that, what we need to do before we trim our quilt sandwich is go around the very edge, just about an eighth of an inch around the edge. Real narrow basting stitch. So you're going to do a basting stitch, so your size of your thread can be a little bit bigger. And I'm just going to line what I'm doing is lining up the inside of my presser foot. Your presser foot has two prongs that come out. So the inner side edge of my presser foot is where the fabric is going. So then my needle will hit right handy there. I'm not going off my fabric, I'm just going right by the edge. All I want to do is put a basting stitch in here to hold my fabric so it doesn't give out on me. Because depending on what you chose as your stitching, you might not have gone all the way to the edge. And so before we put our binding on, I want us to do an eighth of an inch around our quilt. Okay. And you could pivot on the edges if you want to. I'm just going to run off the edge. I'm doing my 1/8 of an inch, and I'm running right off the edge of my quilt. And then I'm starting again. So. I just want to keep all the layers together, especially when we start pinning our binding on. Now, of course, you'd go slower than me. Okay. Once you have that around, if you can see, I have a border all the way around. That's holding all my edges so that when I trim this, I can get a better cut. Okay, once you have that stitched, all your edges, you can take out your basting stitches. You would have removed your pins, but if you would have basted, you can take out your basting stitches. Once you have it quilted and you've sewn that edging, now you need to take your scissors and just follow your thread, your fabric up along the sides. You're cutting off the excess, but don't cut off your fabric. So you're going to trim right up to your gray borders. I'll show you here in a minute. All I did was I went down along the side there where I sewed, and all my fabric came together, and I followed my gray down and I trimmed off the excess. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now. Trim that off, and when we get back together, I'm going to talk to you about making binding and then putting our binding on, and then we'll be done. Okay, if you got all your edges done, we're going to move on to our binding strips. You have 2 of them. I left the selvages on because I saw in one video that I watched, even though I know how to do this, that it might be easier for you to follow a straight line. If you notice that one of your edges, let me get back on here. 2 of your edges of your binding strips have selvages on them. And when we sew our binding together, we're going to place one strip face up so that the pretty side is up. The other one we're going to face down so the right sides are together. And if you line up the one side to your selvage and the other to the top of your piece, then you can make a diagonal. You can sew from one corner to the other. So you're going to go from the top edge to the bottom edge, and you're going to situate your needle so it's in the center, And if you need to draw a line, you can. Okay? I can eyeball it. But if you need to draw a line, like a pencil line, I usually use a pencil. But really, you're going to be sewing on it, so I'll use an ink pen here. And I'll take it off here and show you what I'm doing. Okay. So I've got one edge back here. One edge is here and one edge is there. And I have them at a 90-degree angle. Okay. And if I had a ruler here, I would use a ruler. But I can draw a line from one corner to the other. And that will be my sewing line. Okay. There's my sewing line. Okay, from one corner to the other. So make sure you have the right side facing up. Your one strip facing up on the bottom, and then the one that's facing down on top. And you want to line it up against your selvage edges, and then you're going to just sew a regular straight line down. You don't have to backstitch or anything. And up. Okay. So I have my diagonal line. You can see the thread there. Now, if I would flip this open, you can see that it has a nice diagonal seam there, and that's what you want, because when you want a nice continuous strip that lines up. Okay? So if it doesn't do that, then you've done it wrong. And there's a diagram. And then you take and you trim 1/4 of an inch away from that seam that you just sewed. So it leaves you with, and if you press it out, that edge out again. Okay. Now I like to press my seams open. Some people, and most people do, to get rid of the bulk. And I'm just finger pressing. Okay, and as you do that, you see there's little dog ears that are coming out, or nubbies, as one of the handouts say. You need to trim those even with your fabric. Okay, so you want to cut those off so you don't have them anymore. So you have a continuous binding strip. Okay, and it depends on how big your object is, quilt is, that you're binding, how many strips you're going to need. Then you need to take your iron, and you could finger press this, but an iron works better. But what you're going to do is you're going to take and you're going to fold this in half, lengthwise or hot dog style, like this, okay? And then you're going to press it. And you do that the whole length of your binding. Let the raw edges meet, and your strips can be hot after you iron it, so be careful you don't burn yourself. Once you have your binding strip pressed in half, cut off the selvage edge of the one end. Okay, so all I have to do is open it up and follow my selvage edge over. Okay. And that's the edge I'm going to start with. Now, I am a binder that binds from the sew it on the top and then turns it to the back. So I'm going to go to the bottom edge of my quilt, okay? And I'm going to start at the, I'm going to leave a tail about 5-6 inches, and there's my 5 or 6 inches, and I'm going to start like at the middle of my quilt, bottom, and I am going to pin a couple places just to get started. But as I sew this, I don't need those pins, okay? You're going to just hold it against the edge, the fabric against the edge, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew from that straight pin that I have there in the center, and I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way until I get to 1/4 of an inch here. Now I'm going to mark with my pen 1/4 of an inch, okay? And that's where I want to stop with my needle down, and then I'm going to go diagonally out to the corner to come off, okay? I'm going to sew, and I'm going to back stitch up here at the first, okay? So you are going to back stitch right at that first pin, where my first pin is, okay? So you're going to back stitch, then you're going to come till you get to 1/4 of an inch away from the corner, and then you're going to pivot with your needle down and go off at an angle. Okay, that's the way I like to do my corners. It makes it easier for the next step, because as you sew, you're going to have to pivot, you're going to have to fold your fabric up. Now, this is going to be a little harder here. When you get to that corner and you've sewed it, you're going to have to fold your fabric up on the end there, okay? So it's going to be folded up, and then you're going to have to bring it back down on itself, okay, to make that square corner. So you're going to sew to the corner, okay, sew to the corner, come off at an angle, which makes it easier for you to angle your fabric up. You're going straight up with it, okay? So then you have a 45-degree angle, and then you're going to fold it back down upon itself to get around that corner, okay? And this should be right to the edge, okay? Right to the edge. And you're going to then start sewing again right at the end. And you're going to repeat this on all 4 corners, okay? And then when you get close to the bottom of your quilt, you're going to stop, and then we're going to figure out how to do the bottom. We're going to stop about about 6 inches apart from each other, and then I'm going to show you how to finish off the end of your quilt, okay? But I hope everyone understands what I did, okay? I will sew to the 1/4 of an inch right mark, come off at an angle, then I'm going to fold this at a 45-degree angle using that angle that I just used when I sewed. So I have a 45-degree angle. Then I'm going to fold this back down directly on top of it, and there I will start sewing again. Okay? Everyone catch that? Alrighty. So begin sewing until you have about 6 to 8 inches away from your beginning. Stop right there and back stitch, and then I'll show you how to finish your binding. So go ahead and stitch that on, and make sure you're stitching it to the front side, okay? And I'll meet back here shortly, and we'll finish off our binding. Okay, I have a needle threaded. I'm only using one thread, and when I get started, what I want to do is hide my knot underneath my binding. So I want to go and make sure that it's underneath there. I've knot at the end. Okay. I've knot at the end. This is going to be hard to see. Okay. And I'm going to come up through. I'm going to go sideways through my fabric. Okay. I don't think I can show it to you too well. It's a slip stitch, basically. You go through your fabric. And you can't see that I went through it. Oh, I can't even show it to you here. You can't see that I went through it. And then I'm going to come up in my binding right at the edge. It's hard to really show you this part. Okay, so I'm going to go down, back through the hole where I came up at. I'm going to travel about a fourth of, you can do a half an inch. Travel, come up through my binding. See, I traveled underneath my fabric there. I didn't go through the front. Make sure you don't go through the front, just the back. And then I came up to the top. I'm going to pull it, and there's my first hidden stitch. Okay, there's extra threads here. Okay, that was okay. My original knot is hidden. Okay, so I'm going to go down again through the same hole I just came up at. Travel half an inch, come up through the very edge of my binding. And all you're basically doing is making stitches so that they're almost invisible, that you can't see. Okay? Okay. So you're going to come and you're going to continue going underneath the fabric, up through the binding. I'm going to see if I can get to the corner before my battery runs out. Your stitches should be small so that they're hidden. Make sure you don't come back onto the front. Keep checking from time to time. Now, granted, I don't have a lot of clips on here right now, but remember, I've got a little bit more practice on you. Okay, we're getting closer to our corner. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right to that corner, right at that corner. I'm coming up through, catching both of my pieces of fabric. I'll slide my clip up a little bit further. Well, it fell off. Okay. And I'm going to go down and up through. I went up through my tip. Okay, so I'm going to go down. I'm going to have to turn it a little bit to maneuver it. And I'm going to go up to the top, and I'm going to come back down again, just catching very little of it. Okay? I want to anchor that corner so it doesn't go anywhere. And there might be a better way of doing it. I just try and hide my stitches, and then I come down to the bottom here, and again I go through my fabric of my quilt, go to the binding, checking, make sure I'm not catching the front, and then I continue on. That way, that miter corner is anchored. Okay? So continue to do that all the way around, And when you get done, just finish knotting it and let the knot, pull the knot to the binding, okay? Or you can knot your thread and then pull it through your quilt. As long as you go through the top layer, the bottom layer, and not the top layer, you can put a knot at the end of your string and wrap it through. So, or just put a little knot on the. I mean, I sometimes just put a knot right where I'm stitching. I'll go up through, and then I'll take it and I'll double put a couple stitches there, like I'm putting an extra stitch there, and I'll run my needle through my thread, and just do a regular knot. Okay? And no one is the wiser. Okay? So then I can cut it right there. So go ahead and attach your binding using a slip stitch. It's a hidden method. Unless I look real close, I can't see it. You try to match the color of your binding so that your thread, you match your binding, and that way it's hidden, and it makes it look overall nice if you can match it. But if you don't have the color to match blue, navy, you can use white, okay? Use whatever you have. No one's going to see the back unless they turn it over. The main part is your front. And I hope that you all enjoyed, let me cut this before I hope you've all enjoyed making your mini pineapple quilt. And I enjoyed doing this with you, even with the technical difficulties. So there will be an August project. It'll be the drawstring backpack, and I hope you will join us for our last project of the year. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.